Crimson Crossover Network. This is The Tide Machine with Charles Branch and Michael Southern. Welcome back to The Tide Machine. I am Charles Branch, joined always by Michael Southern. Alabama escapes Columbia, South Carolina this past week with a 29-22 victory over the South Carolina Gamecocks. Michael, it got very intense there in the fourth quarter, but Alabama does come away with a huge victory, and now we go into the bye week. Give me your initial thoughts about the game and just how you felt like what you liked and what you didn't like from Alabama's time over at Williams-Brice Stadium.
Well, obviously, I like the fight, and I think everyone would agree that that last game, the mentality, well, maybe not everybody, but at least the way I viewed it was the mentality of like the NCAA tournament at this point. All you need to do is just find a way to win. Doesn't matter. I'm not worried about the point spread because I didn't bet on the game. Just want Alabama to win and get out of there alive because they need a rest more than probably any team in the country right now. So appreciate the fact that they had the fight. They didn't wilt. They answered the challenge this time. Yes, you'd like to see them be a little more, execute a little more sharply. Everything was just a little bit off. But then you saw when they needed to answer the challenge, they responded. And look, in those critical situations, the 2-point conversion, the drive that you had to have, you can clearly tell this is something the team practices and has been practicing for a long time. You didn't see any hesitation. You didn't see any confusion. And when they needed to execute, it just looked like, hey, we know what to do. And they went out and did it. So that's what's the most satisfying part about that. Like I said, rest up this week. You're going to have an emotional game against LSU with the interim coach. You don't know what state you're going to get with those guys. So they're always going to be dangerous. But again, I was very, very pleased to see the fight that Alabama came back with in the second half, especially there late in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, very pleased to see the fight. And, the game did not start, obviously, how we wanted. That South Carolina drove it all the way down the field, and you hold them to 3 points, but they took 7 minutes off the clock. They played how Alabama had been playing. And we come out, 3 and out, but then we get the pick six. And I felt like our offense could move the ball at times, but just couldn't really, finish drives like we were accustomed to. And there was a lot of talk about the 4-game gauntlet against ranked teams and playing not another non-conference, an unranked team and struggling against an unranked team. And maybe it's a little bit of revisionist history from me, but I want to talk about that a little bit more because the teams that Alabama lost to last year, Vanderbilt eventually did get ranked at some point during the season. It was barely in the top 25, but they did become a ranked team and they pushed around a lot of other really good teams. Oklahoma last year, who we lost to, ended up being a top 20 team early on in the year. And Michigan, I believe, was a top 15 team. And of course, that was the bowl game where we had guys out, they had guys out. So you didn't really know what was going to happen. Florida State this year has jumped all the way up to number 8 before their season started falling apart. And South Carolina started this year number 10. And so I am one that it's important when you play a team. I feel like your ranked wins should count when you play the team. So if it's a ranked team and they fall out of the top 25, it should still be considered a ranked win, in my opinion. But that's a South Carolina team that still has a ton of talent. They were very hot towards the end of last year and carrying a lot of momentum. And their offense just hasn't really clicked. But Williams-Brice is a very underrated stadium in the SEC as well. They have a great atmosphere. And so to come in there and do what Alabama did, especially in the fourth quarter, as the students started moving down closer to the field so that they could try to get on and rush the field. But putting that drive together, executing that 2-point conversion, and then executing that last drive as well, which I know we'll talk about, our feelings about Jeremy Bernard scoring or not. It's a very resilient win. I've tried to compare it to other Alabama games of the past, and if I had to compare it to me, it's a mix of Alabama versus Tennessee in 2009, where that Alabama team needed to get to the bye week, and they held on 12-10, as we talked about a couple weeks ago with Rocky Block and Mount Cody and all those guys. And it also kind of reminded me of 2010 Alabama at Arkansas. Arkansas was a really good team. Alabama would be down 20-7 in that game before mounting a 17-point comeback and winning 24-20, 17 points unanswered, but really hadn't done a whole lot in the game until it got late in the third quarter and the rest of the fourth quarter. So, you want to be able to come out, you want to be able to execute, but to still have that mental toughness to turn it on in the fourth quarter and win is something that should help continue to give this team momentum as they go into the bye week. But I don't think there's anything to be hanging your head about as far as coming out of South Carolina with the win this past weekend.
No, anytime you get a SEC road win, especially in an environment like that, there's nothing to be ashamed of if you had to win it on the last second play or a late drive. A win is a win. Take it and enjoy it. Learn from it. There's things that you can take from that. The thing about this year's team that you can see and everyone can see is this. While it's not the Alabama team that you're used to in the years past where we joke about joyless murder ball games over with at halftime, not every game, but maybe a majority of them, this team is very, very solid when it comes to situational football. When a key play needs to be made to swing the momentum, whether it's offense or defense, they seem to step up to it. And I don't think that's luck. Okay, maybe one time's luck, but when you repeatedly do it game after game after game, it's something they focus on, it's something they practice, and it's something they're confident in. So it's not luck. It's preparation meets opportunity. I mean, that's the true definition of luck, and I think that's what you're seeing this season.
I would like to see from this team where they do have those opportunities to play quote unquote joyless murder ball. A lot of these times in the second half, we have started with the ball to start the second half and we have a lead and just haven't been able to put a drive together to finish the game off. And I think there's a lot of opportunities that we have missed to be able to put games away early and cruise like we are accustomed to. Now, I know college football has changed as far as scoring margins. I was talking to somebody that on average, I think scoring margins across college football was 16 points, and now it's down to 10 points. So there's a lot more games that are closer. And of course, there's also a lot more parity. But it is something I'd like to see this team do a better job of putting teams away when you have the opportunity. And we talked about it last week, with Mike Shula, the player and the coach when we knew before we recorded that they were having protests at South Carolina about Mike Shula being the office coordinator. I mean, you're probably like me. You just you don't want it, but you start getting a weird feeling about this game that he would do something, South Carolina would do something that would surprise us or shock us. Not or just have a shocking result, but luckily this team was able to pull through and get the win. Which I'm not a big fan of Joe Tessitore and Jesse Palmer, but are you not surprised that at no point did they ever mention that Mike Shula, former player, former Alabama player, and former Alabama coach, as offensive coordinator for South Carolina? I don't think I heard it all game from either one of them.
Yeah, that's a good point. I don't remember ever hearing them say that either. And you'd think they would have made that connection. You'd think they would have had something in pregame, but that was never touched upon. I don't know, it was just ignored, or I don't know, maybe it happened so long ago. But his tenure at coach was before Saban, so you'd think that at least brought that up too. And look, the thing with Mike Shula and the play calling. Remember, at the end of the day, he's got an NFL talent quarterback. That Lenore Sellers is going to be in the NFL. He doesn't have the supporting cast that he had last year, so there's a little deficiencies here and there, but he's still a dangerous threat. Um, yes, I hated to see the things that were happening with Mike as far as the protest. I think they were a little bit unfair from that standpoint. Uh, I guess it was almost a win-win in the fact that I won't say they redeemed themselves, but they played a spirited game. They had some sparks. It was good, but at the end of the day, Alabama still won. So we got a little bit of both, which I'm actually probably okay with from that standpoint. It was a little nerve-wracking, so maybe a little bit too close there at certain points. But at the end of the day, Alabama won, and also I thought Mike called a really good game, given the talent limitations that he has as far as pure weapons are concerned, and all he has is an all-star quarterback. He's trying to make things happen.
So with that, Alabama's history at place kicker, I was 100% in support of Jerry Bernard scoring that touchdown. Didn't know that that was going to be an opportunity, but I've always had the philosophy, and it probably comes from watching Alabama football and place kickers for Alabama in the past. where don't play for the field goal at the 25-yard line. Play to score or at least get it to a position where you're kicking from, the 15 or the 10 or whatever it may be. What was your feelings as a deep Alabama fan with a lot of history on what you wanted to see on that play?
You darn right. Get in the end zone. Do not leave that up to your kicker. But here's the funny thing from my perspective. I grew up in an era where you could rely on the field goal kickers. So I grew up on Van Tiffen making game-winning kicks, Philip Doyle hitting a game winner, Michael Proctor coming out and nailing 4 to 5 field goals. And then things just kind of turned. After the Gene Stallings era, things just really went sideways. And for some reason, I don't know if it was lack of emphasis and the next coaching staff, thought would just get walk-ons, or they didn't believe how important it was to have a reliable kicker. But after that last series run, when you had Michael Proctor, then things just really got very inconsistent. You would have a decent run here and there, and then even during the Saban era, even the kickers that you thought were going to be good struggled with inconsistency. So yes, absolutely, Jeremy Bernard, get in the end zone. If South Carolina is going to let you score, you take it in. Don't take a knee at the one. Do not leave that. And again, no disrespect to Connor Talty, but take the touchdown. Don't play for the field goal.
Yeah, I feel like I can pinpoint the kicker, at least from my young age. I won't say his name, but it was from the 1999 season, and it came after missing the extra point in the Orange Bowl against Michigan. And he
Oh,
had really struggled throughout the entire year as it was. He missed multiple extra points in the SEC championship as well. I think ever since that point, there has just been a bad taste in my mouth for Alabama kickers, not to the point of talking down to them, because like you said, we do there is a history with not only Van Tiffen and Michael Proctor, but Jamie Christensen or Lee Tiffin or Adam Griffith or Will Reichard, who's the points college football points leader now. Alabama has had good kickers, but we've also seen, like in the 2018 national championship game, where our kicker duck hooks the opportunity to win the national championship. But of course, if he makes it, we never get second 26 to Devontae Smith. So, I'm sure it's for you. It's like me. It's always an uneasy feeling having to try to field goal kicker out there to win a game.
so what's crazy is, I guess, if you kind of look at the totality of the Saban era, when you had the good kicker, you never had the situation where you needed him to kick the game winner. And then when the game was on the line, you didn't have the kicker. So it's just how the timing never matched. Because yeah, I would have been very comfortable with Will Reichard coming out there if you needed the last second game winner. But we really never had that opportunity because the teams he played on were so good. They were just always ahead, and you didn't need that last second win. But those other times, would have loved to have Will Reichard. Especially those times in the futility there in 2013 down at Auburn. Would have loved to have him down there at that time.
Well, and to invoke the post from our Twitter account that you had of Alabama Penn State and Alabama blocking the field goal basically on the goal line. I mean, South Carolina had some freak athletes on the defensive line. We saw them all day getting after Ty Simpson and giving our offensive line problems. I imagine they could have done some damage as well trying to block a field goal. Not to say that they would have got it, but again, when you got an opportunity to put 7 points on the board, especially against that offense, as much as it has struggled throughout the year, I think you take the 7 points. And even if they had called a touchback, they ran it, they muffed it, and they tried to run it out and got tackled, I think inside the 10. Even if you put them at the 20 or the 25-yard line, I think you take that as your opportunity to say, okay, come tie us up or come beat us if you want to make a 2-point conversion after that, then just wait until the final seconds and try to make a field goal into a student section that was pretty fired up. And as we mentioned, starting to move a little bit closer to the field as well, hoping that they get to storm the field after a South Carolina victory.
Well, that was nice watching the deflation there. There wasn't going to be no field storming on that one, but you asked 1,000 Alabama fans in that situation, score the touchdown or play to the last second and kick a chip shot field goal. Everyone's going to say score the touchdown. Do not place it in the hands of a kicker on a last second kick right now.
Well, as the team is on a bye week and be preparing for LSU the next week, there are no off weeks in the Tide Machine. So we wanted to do something fun, similar to our favorite players. We're actually going to talk about some of our favorite plays. The qualifier for what constitutes a favorite play for either Michael or myself is we had to be in the stadium. So there may be some plays that people are a little surprised don't make the list. We had to be there, which I think will make this even more fun. So, Michael, I'm gonna let you go first with your favorite play, and we'll jump right into it.
Okay, so one of the first ones for me is going to go date myself. We're going to go all the way back to 1984. So we're going to go to the 1984 Iron Bowl, the infamous 17-15 game for those old enough to remember that game. I had the privilege of actually being at, that's the first Iron Bowl I saw in person. I was in the end zone of Legion Field, right where the fourth quarter action was happening, coming toward us. I'm going to talk about the famous wrong way Bo Roy Turner play where he stopped Brent Fullwood on fourth down. Same situation. Pat Dye didn't want to send a kicker out there to try to take the lead. He goes for it on fourth down. Bo Jackson gets confused. He's supposed to help block for Brent Fullwood, goes the opposite way. Fullwood's left on an island, and Roy Turner comes up, hits him, and drags him out of bounds one-on-one. And I just remember the post-game quote after I read everything the next morning in the Tuscaloosa News and the Birmingham News, where Rory Turner basically just says, "I waxed the dude." That was one of the greatest quotes I remember growing up. It was a great memory. Alabama, yes, they had their first losing season in 27 years, but they beat Auburn. If I remember correctly, they prevented Auburn from going to the Sugar Bowl. That put LSU in the Sugar Bowl, so it knocked Auburn out of the SEC championship. And I remember leaving the stadium. They had people out there selling like instant bumper stickers, so I had to get one of the 17-15 instant bumper stickers as we were leaving Legion Field. But uh, where I was at, I was in the Alabama side because you remember Legion Field was 50-50. I was in the end zone, but I was not right at the edge of where the Auburn fans started, so I was surrounded by Alabama fans. I just remember how we reacted, especially when you saw Full was all alone, and then you saw Rory Turner just come up, grab him, hit him heads up, and just pulls him out of bounds. So we went crazy. Now, the one thing to remember is that Auburn still had one more shot to win that game. Auburn got the ball back again, drove down, and I think it was Robert McGinney had a chance to make a 42-yard field goal, and he missed that one. So we had two key plays in the fourth quarter where they stopped him on the fourth down attempt, and then on the field goal, I'm trying to remember if it was wide left or wide right. I just remember he missed it because we went crazy when McGinney missed it. So that was a very memorable experience there at Legion Field. I couldn't ask for a better Iron Bowl. I wish the season would have been better, but as far as the first Auburn game I went to in person, that one I will never forget.
And the quote you mentioned, "I waxed the dude," is very iconic. I think
Yes.
anytime anybody would mention or talks about the 1984 Iron Bowl, that's immediately what I go to because I remember watching an old Alabama video, highlight video and talking about, great Alabama plays and stuff like that. And it talks about Rory Turner knocking Fullwood out of bounds and talks about how he said, "I waxed the dude." And
It was a great quote.
I do find it very funny that the year prior, I believe I've got my Auburn history correct, was Bo over the top, and then the next 2 years is wrong way Bo and the kick. So maybe Auburn should be careful about naming games because Alabama has found a way to win a lot of games after they like to name games.
Yeah, that was a wild time in the 80s. You I won't. Well, no, I will say it. There was a lot of hatred there in the '80s between the two programs back then. Pat Dye and Ray Perkins, they really went after each other hard, and they put a lot into those games, and it meant a lot to both win it, and it hurt a lot to lose it. I'll just say that about the '80s between those two.
Would you say that hatred is what ultimately led to Auburn wanting to move the Iron Bowl back to where they got home games at Auburn because we still kept it at Birmingham until basically the early 2000s? Was that hatred that was going on what maybe kind of helped push that a little bit more to Auburn?
Oh, it definitely contributed to it. I won't say it's the 100% reason, but Pat Dye, when he took over and also became athletic director, he was determined to get when that contract ended, they were not going to renew and agree to play in Legion Field. Because remember, back then the recruiting rules are you can only host recruits on campus stadium. So when you played at Legion Field, you didn't have recruits there. I don't believe Alabama did or Auburn did, and they wanted that game in Jordan-Hare, and that's fine. I actually appreciate it now being in Tuscaloosa and Auburn back and forth. There was something special back in the day when it was 50-50 in Birmingham, but I'm perfectly fine now with it being a home and home series. But Pat Dye, as soon as he took over, I knew that was one of the things on his agenda. He was going to get that game out of Legion Field. And in fairness to the Auburn fans, they never believed that was a 50-50 neutral site anyways, and I understand that.
Well, I'm gonna go to my first game, and I think it's poetic or whatever that it's also an Iron Bowl game. It's the 1996 Alabama Auburn game that was also in Legion Field. I remember being out in the parking lot prior to the game. We've probably talked about it before. That would ultimately be the game that afterwards Gene Stallings would announce his retirement effective at the end of the year. We would still play in the SEC championship game and the Outback Bowl. But that was a game that we got up 17-0 on Auburn very quickly. And they ended up tying the game by halftime. It was 23-7, 23-17 going into the fourth quarter. And our offense really had stalled out, couldn't get anything going. And then had 76 yards to go on the final drive and hit Dennis Riddle for a couple swing passes, hit Michael Vaughn over the middle. I think Freddie Kitchens had a scramble in there as well. But we had gone swing pass to the right, swing pass to the right to Dennis Riddle on our sidelines, and had actually tried it again on first and goal, and Kitchens had just overthrew him a little bit. But I can still visualize from our seats Dennis Riddle coming out to the left, Kitchens hitting him, him cutting back into the middle. He runs into the end zone and he runs into the area where all the Auburn fans are. And as classy as Auburn fans are, they all start throwing their shakers at him. But, Dennis had the visor and all that, so he was protected. But I just remember, for my first Iron Bowl to be that game that we would eventually win 24-23, to also secure a spot into the SEC championship, but to really pull it out of nothing. I mean, also kind of similar to this past weekend. And then you finish the game, and you had the old TVs that you could get the antenna out and you could plug them into the cigarette lighter in your car and stuff like that and power them. And that's how we watched Gene Stallings announce his retirement in that press conference. But I'll always remember that 1996 game, and I'll always remember the swing pass out to Dennis Riddle that eventually got us over the hump and helped secure that 24-23 victory.
Well, there's something special, again, as we talked about. If you're fortunate enough to be in the stadium and you have an emotional game like that with a finish like that, those things you don't forget. They'll stay with you forever on that one, and that's a good memory to have.
All right, so what's your second game?
All right, so still going to stay in the 80s. I'm going to kind of skip time about 2 years. Going to go to 1986. I know when we talked about our favorite players, we talked about Cornelius Bennett, but for me, in 1986, no better play encapsulates what it meant to me that year than the sack by Cornelius Bennett against Notre Dame there in Legion Field. I remember me and a friend had tickets. We were in the upper deck. We were actually had a good view, a good sight line. We were actually center of the field in the upper deck, had a perfect sight of it. I remember when Bernline, as he started to turn, we were watching, and you could see Cornelius Bennett. He was unblocked. He had like the easiest clean shot at him. And literally, I still remember the sound of him hitting. You could hear that up in the upper deck when he hit him. And then my friend, as soon as he hit him, my friend said, "That's a fumble. The ball's out." He's screaming in my ear, "It's a fumble. It's a fumble." And of course, the officials ruled him down, and that was a terrible call when you saw it. When I saw it later that night, I believe at home. But the thing, what made it so important on that one is, again, that's the first time Alabama beats Notre Dame. That means a lot to not just my generation, but the baby boomers, the ones who remember the Sugar Bowl loss, the Orange Bowl loss, the 7-0 loss at Legion Field in 1980. I mean, Notre Dame that's the one team along with Texas that just mystified the Bryant era. It's something that everybody wanted. I remember at the soup store there, my sister actually worked on campus back then, and they were selling shirts. for the game to the students, and it said "Beat the hell out of Notre Dame." So she had actually got me one of those shirts, and I wore that to the game, and that's what I was wearing. Now it was hot that day. It was a hot day at Legion Field, but it was worth every minute of it, even sitting in the sun. I probably got sunburned, but we had a great time. It meant a lot to beat Notre Dame because my memories of Notre Dame started in 1980 with that 7-0 loss at Legion Field. So that game hurt. Wanted to beat Notre Dame. So when we finally beat Notre Dame, I can tell you in the post game, as fans left the stadium, there were so many that just seemed so, I don't know, jubilant just because they had lived through all the pain of those losses in the 70s and 1980s. So there was a lot of celebration post game leaving Birmingham and outside Legion Field that Alabama had finally beat Notre Dame.
I don't know how many officials would have been on the field for that era. I know they've added some more college football officials. You've got the referee, and you've also got another official now that's in the backfield. That's the guy that people are typically getting mad at to let us snap the ball and over substitutions. But I still don't see how, even with one official behind the quarterback, that you don't call that a fumble and that you believe that the turf caused that fumble. It still blows my mind that he was called down and that the turf called the fumble, or turf caused the fumble.
What's funny is whenever I post a video or a memory of that, and I do that frequently when it ties into something. And of course, I'll always do an Cornelius Bennett, and most of the time he'll always answer back, and he'll answer with, "That was a fumble." He'll just put that on X. He just replies back, "That was a fumble." It's just funny because even he knows, hey, I should have had the ball. I should have got credit for a fumble recovery.
Yeah, a very iconic play, not even just Alabama history, but I feel like college football history, especially for that 80s time period, that was a play that got showed a lot. And yeah, it was a fumble. It was for
Yes,
sure.
it was
A
100%.
All right, well, I'll go to my next play, and I'm bringing out some memorabilia, a prop for this one. But this is from the 1999 SEC championship game. Yes, we did win this game. Obviously, that's why I would get the SEC championship hat, and I've got a bunch of different signatures on it. But if you remember that season, had lost to Louisiana Tech early on in the year. A lot of rumors about Mike DeBose being fired at some point. We go down to the swamp. We beat them in overtime, 40-39. Talking about struggling kickers, our first attempt in overtime, we missed the extra point. Florida was offsides. We got a second shot at it and just snuck it within the upright. So adding to, again, why we like Jeremy Bernard to score that touchdown. But get all the way to Atlanta for the SEC championship game, and who do we have but Steve Spurrier and the Florida Gators again. And Florida, I remember, came out, first drive of the game, marched right down the field. They're up 7-0, and that's basically all they did as far as an offense. I think by the end of that game, it's the least amount of yards at that point that a Steve Spurrier offense had gained against any opponent. But the play that I'm going to did happen in the fourth quarter. Alabama at the time was leading 15-7, had the ball deep in their own territory, and Freddie Millens was installed as basically a Wildcat quarterback before Wildcat was really even talked about for that position. Takes the snap, starts left, comes back to the right, down the Florida sidelines, gets a great block by Tyler Watts, goes 70 plus yards all the way for a touchdown. We end up going 22-7. And I again, visualizing it, my seat, first time for me to go to an SEC championship game, first time for me to be in the Georgia Dome. And I'm sitting kind of in that second level, not the lower level, but kind of that middle ring of the old Georgia Dome behind the Alabama end zone where it's painted Alabama and all that. And so I've got a perfect view to watch Freddie Millens running down the sidelines and score. And when that happened, knowing how well our defense had played, knowing it was now going to be at least a 14, if not a 15-point game, which we did convert that extra point, you really were able to start believing that, hey, we're going to beat Florida again, and we're going to get to go to a New Year's, a high profile New Year's bowl game, which we would eventually go to the Orange Bowl. And while the play that I'm talking about, the Freddie Millens play, is what I'll always remember. The other play that I'll always remember from that game too, that probably isn't as special unless you have the Freddie Millens play, is Florida's next offensive possession. First play, they're at the 40-yard line. Jesse Palmer, who you know my feelings about him as an announcer, tries to throw a pass out to the right. Jarrett Johnson tips it. Reggie Grimes catches it before it hits the ground. He spins out, goes down the Florida sideline, scores another touchdown, tries to jump into the Alabama stands, gets like 2 inches off the ground. And I remember the ABC cameras, they turn to the Florida sidelines, and Steve Spurrier is just like shocked. He's holding his face like this, and he's just shocked. He can't believe what has just happened. But that play really reminded me of what I grew up watching a lot, the Alabama Miami national championship game where George Teague eventually, had the interception after Derek Lassick had scored the touchdown and really blew that game open. Got to experience that in a different setting, but once that play happened, you knew the game was over. That Florida was not coming back from that. Not only had they struggled on offense, but then they just given us 6 points. Their offense had given us 6 points through our defense, and you could just enjoy the rest of the game. And I think we ended up getting another interception the following drive as well. But I'll always remember. I mean, I've gone back and watched it on YouTube. I don't know how many times. Freddie Millens coming down the sideline, the Florida sidelines for 70 plus yards and putting that game basically out of reach.
The only bad thing is when you go back and watch those highlights is too bad HD television didn't exist in 1999 because that play deserved to be in high definition as far as when Millens made that run back. And I remember what was funny is the not controversy, the discussion was who's going to start at quarterback, Zauer or Watts, Zauer or Watts. Well, they rotated him the entire game, but then at the end of the day, the biggest play by a quarterback turned out to be by Freddie Millens when they put him back there. So that was what. Oh, and the picture of Spurrier going like this, do you think it's because of the play or the fact he came to the realization that how did I lose to a Mike DuBose coach team twice in one season?
And that's a great point. But he's holding his face, watching Reggie Grimes score, and then he kind of just side eyes Jesse Palmer like Steve Spurrier would to his quarterbacks. And that I remember, so I had the opportunity to go to, I think it was the senior banquet that, they used to host banquets for the seniors, and Tide Pride members or different people were able to go to those as well. And they showed that play at the senior banquet, I think when they brought Reggie Grimes up, and they stopped it right when the camera got on Spurrier, and the place erupted. Everybody loved it. But I think both. I think he was shocked that Jesse Palmer threw a pass that just hit a defensive lineman and we ran it back. And yeah, I think he had to have been shocked that he lost to Mike DuBose 2 times in 1 year.
That had to eat at him
Oh, yes.
in the entire offseason. That really got under his skin. There's no doubt about that. That's what's funny. Okay, so you mentioned the George Teague pick six in the Sugar Bowl, January 1st, 1993. But for me, the George Teague play that I always remember, of course, is also the one that's immortalized on Daniel Moore canvas, is the strip. So first year out of college, I actually get a sports writing job in Gadsden. I'm covering the team that year, the championship season. I covered a lot of the games, and I end up getting to go to New Orleans for the whole week. So I'm there for all the pregame. I'm there to cover it, all that. Sitting in the Superdome, I've got a couple of people I know to my left, and Mark Edwards from Decatur Daily was to my right. Jerry Feltz and the Florence Times Daily, they were to my left. But I remember when that play happened, Miami's trying to do whatever they can to get back into the game somehow. And when Toretto throws the ball to Thomas, everyone thinks he's gone. And then all of a sudden, you just see 13 coming out of nowhere as a blur with the angle. And then as we're watching it, when he takes the ball, I think me and Mark Edwards look at each other and we're like, does he have the ball? Did he just take the ball? So we're saying the same thing I think Keith Jackson and Bob Greasy are saying on the ABC broadcast. So when we realize he has the ball and he's running it back, it was like, he took the ball. He stripped the ball from him. We're saying the same thing they're probably saying on television. And then I believe Jerry Feltz points out, it's like, I think someone was offside. So he points to the flag. So then we're realizing, like, well, okay, the play's going to come back. But everyone's going to remember. That's going to be the most memorable non-play that ever happened in history. And to go with your props, I still have my USF&G Sugar Bowl mug or stein or whatever they gave us. This was part of the media swag they gave to us when we arrived in New Orleans. So when you check into the media hotel, you go to get your credentials so you can have access to where they have the press conferences and all the media information, and they give you a nice swag bag. And that's the one thing that has traveled with me since late December 93 that I have never gotten rid of. I have kept the entire time. I'll probably have this for a long time. I can't believe it's made it this far, but I still have it. And this is a good testament or memory to that game, because that everyone knows from that period, Alabama went through some fractured period with the Curry era, the rocky up and downs with the Perkins era, and that team was the one that brought everything back together. I won't say it saved the fan base, but how about it gave them the redemption that they were looking for, and that was a special season, and that meant a lot to the fans that were worried, because I would guess at that time there were a lot of fans who really wondered, is Alabama ever going to win it again? Because they were fearful of that after the passing of Bryant. They saw the struggles with Perkins. They lived through the 3 years of Curry. They just didn't know, how long is it going to take. And Gene Stallings, in his third year back, he delivered. And that's a memorable season, a memorable game, capped by a memorable play that technically didn't count in the official game summary, but it is immortalized in the Daniel Moore print.
Before YouTube, before DVDs and all that, there was these things called VCRs and VHS tapes.
Yes.
And my parents had a recording of the 1993 Alabama-Miami Sugar Bowl. And I'm actually surprised I never broke a VCR or burned up that VHS tape for how many times that I would have rewound that play, or the play I talked about earlier about George Teague intercepting the ball, or the David Palmer punt return. And what I remember from watching that VHS tape too is when Alabama ran out onto the field, you could hear the crowd in the background. Keith and Bob Greasy are kind of talking about the game, but they cut to the Alabama tunnel as they run out. And Keith Jackson makes a comment that it was talking about how many Alabama fans were in the Superdome, and making the comment of they know how to get the tickets probably because they've been here so many times, and just the rich tradition that Alabama had as a football program. And now being older and knowing the run that Miami had and all their success, and I think also being told the story that Lamar Thomas was the fastest guy on Miami's team. And George Teague he was fast, but maybe the third or fourth fastest guy on the Alabama team, and he ran him down. And knowing that, Miami was basically, I may not be 100% accurate on this, but believe Miami was pretty close to being wire to wire number one. And nobody really thought Alabama had a chance before the beginning of the year that Alabama would win the national championship. And so, like you said, all that coming together for that one season to kind of bridge what has been this Bryant to Saban era, that you had this national championship that probably did, helped make Alabama what it is. Of course, winning a national championship does that, but it shows that it's not just one coach, like at UCLA with John Wooden. It made it more like a Kentucky basketball with Adolph Rupp and some of their other coaches that have won national championships, that you can be successful at Alabama. You don't have to. Alabama's been fortunate to have two of the greatest coaches of all time in college football, but other coaches like Gene Stallings, like Wallace Wade, like Frank Thomas, like hopefully Kalen DeBoer can win national championships at Alabama.
There's one other funny story I remember that week there. I was one morning at breakfast with Coach Stallings, and this was back in the infancy of ESPN with Lee Corso and Craig James. Craig James, who preceded Kirk Herbstreit. Obviously, they had a set down there built up close to the Superdome. It was actually in one of the hallways of the hotel that we were staying at. But I think, if I remember correctly, on one broadcast segment, Lee Corso mentioned something that, Alabama's undefeated, but they're really not that good a team. They're probably one of the weakest undefeated teams you're going to have play for a championship. And someone mentioned that to Coach Stallings at breakfast, and he kind of joked. He said, "Well, if anybody knows anything about bad teams, it would be Lee Corso." In reference to his tenure as a coach, it was hilarious when he said that. That was one of the funniest lines I've ever heard from Gene Stallings before.
Well, we've been beating up on some of the Florida State teams, and I'm going to stick with Florida again for my next game. And it comes from the 2005 Alabama-Florida game in Bryant-Denny Stadium. Probably talked a little bit about it last week with Mike Shula being the head coach. Urban Meyer's, I believe is Urban Meyer's first year at Florida. Chris Leak at quarterback for them. Alabama and Florida are an intense recruiting battle for Tim Tebow. But if you also remember, Chad Jackson, who was a wide receiver at Hoover High School, had recently just joined Florida. He had committed to Florida out of high school. He was a highly touted recruit, didn't go to Alabama, went to Florida. And I think that, I mean, obviously that rubbed people the wrong way that you couldn't keep that in-state talent at home. So I remember that kind of added to it. And of course, Mike Shula, needing a signature win, and Alabama was undefeated, and Brody Cordell's last season. And so Florida starts with the ball on offense. They go 3-and-out. They punt the ball. We muff the punt. Florida gets it back, and then I think we held them to a 3-and-out again. And then we're ended up, getting the ball on our own 12, 13-yard line. And it's an interesting stat from that 2005 team that we didn't talk about last week. You know that every Alabama offensive possession, first possession of the game, started with a pass. First play of the first drive of every game started with the pass. And luckily for that play, play action pass, and where my parents' seats are, I mean, had a great view to where safety bit down, pro throw was one-on-one. He catches it at the 50, the guy falls down, and he's going to score. And to me, I still feel like that's the loudest I've heard, Bryant-Denny Stadium. I know Rocky Block, I know Xavier Brown's pick six. I've heard Jahad Campbell's fumble recovery against Tennessee, a couple plays against LSU. To me, that's still the loudest that I've heard Bryant-Denny Stadium. And it just set the tone for that game. Florida's next drive, we'd get a tipped interception that we ran down to the 1-yard line. And that's also it's sad too, because of course that would be Tyrone Prothrow's last real game at Alabama. But that play to open up the game and just what that game was building to just have that moment and then hold on to it and really, never give Florida an opportunity to get in the game. I'll definitely remember that play for forever.
So you talked about the loudest moment. That's definitely one of the loudest moments. I wish someone had recorded the decibel levels so we'd have a true comparison between all the plays. But the other thing about that game is you talk about the crowd noise. It was a sustained crowd noise. Mm-hmm. Up until Prothro getting injured, up until that point, the crowd was consistently loud through that entire game. And I can't remember a game where it was that loud for that long a period. So that was another memorable moment for the history of Alabama in that stadium.
I mean, I'm probably wrong, but I also feel like I remember that's the first game that probably stood the entire game in my seats, and nobody else is complaining about you standing because everybody's standing because everybody's trying to be loud, everybody's trying to do their part. I mean, it was sustained throughout and really didn't stop until Prothrow's injury in the end zone where some of the air was let out of the stadium. But it was just constant pressure, and and part of that too was probably trying to build an atmosphere to help show Tim Tebow why he needed to come to Alabama and not go to Florida.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to stick with Tyrone Prothro because one of the next one's mine. Now, this happened prior to obviously the Florida game, but that same season in 2005, you had Alabama struggling against Southern Miss in the first half, looking like they may be a victim of an upset. I think they were down 21-10 late in the first half. And then, I think it was 4th and 12. Alabama decides to just go for it. And Brody throws up the pass to Tyrone Prothro. The guy is between him and the ball. Prothro wraps his arm around the guy's head, catches it behind his head, and comes down with it. I remember we were watching it, and that was when I was in the press box and I had my binoculars. So I was watching the play, and I can't remember if I turned to Tommy Dees or who I turned to. I said, I think he just caught that. I think they're going to say that's a catch. And at first, they initially ruled it a touchdown, but I was like, I think I just saw the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life at a football game. It was incredible. Same situation, three of these five plays have been immortalized by Daniel Moore. Who would have ever thought that a game against Southern Miss with a catch right before halftime would become a famous Daniel Moore printing that you're going to see across the state at the Waysider for breakfast? You're going to see every one of those. But I remember when it happened, Alabama needed the spark. It was a fantastic play that you saw over and over again, and they came back and won. And that was part of the catalyst to keep that team going, to get to Florida undefeated, and to do what they did that year.
Yeah, when the play happened, they didn't really know what to call. It took them for a
Yeah,
while to call it, and then they called it a touchdown, and then they'd have to go back and review it and say he was down at the one. So I had my own kind of like personal tradition going to games with my parents around that time, where towards getting close to halftime, I liked to go down to the track, go down to the fence, and I liked to go to where the opposing team was running in and out because where Alabama used to run out, it was where the student section is now, but it was right there in the middle, kind of like they do now, but on the opposite side. But the opposing team still kind of came from the side and got close to the fence, kind of like how they do now, just the reverse side in Bryant-Denny Stadium. And I always liked kind of going down there, just seeing those college athletes and seeing some of those players and stuff like that. So I was right there at the goal line watching Prothrow make that catch. And I knew as soon as he caught, or as soon as it happened, that it was a catch because he kept his hands on the ball. Even if it hit the ground at any point, the ball never moved. His hands stayed on it. And it is one of I mean, I think the ESPN announcer said that's the catch of the college football season or whatever. Again, it's another play kind of like Cornelius Bennett, that all these athletes, all these college football players have had all these incredible plays now that kind of stood alone by themselves for so many years that's a play that you probably should see more and more often with how incredible of a catch it was.
no, that I still marvel at it, and that same thing. You go back and watch that on YouTube over and over again. Just the the concentration when he goes up, and then how he catches it and pins it. Behind. I think it was Jasper Falk was the DB, but he
Mhm.
pins it behind his helmet. And he comes down and he lands back and stretches over. So he stretched over the arc with his back arced over, and he still has his hands on the ball. So I mean, it's still tragic how Tyrone's career ended later that season, but he was a heck of a player. There's no telling what that 2005 team could have done had you had a healthy Tyrone Prothrow. And there's no doubt Tyrone Prothrow would have played in the NFL. How big a star would he have been? I don't know, but he was tough. He had dog in him, and he would have played in the NFL, no doubt in my mind on that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, my next play might be a little bit of an obscure play, probably not one that's remembered by a lot of people, but it comes with another prop as well. So it's from the 2008 Alabama Auburn game, Iron Bowl. We had lost what? How many
Five
games?
straight,
Thank you,
five.
five
Yeah,
straight. I know it was
fear the thumb.
fear the other hand and all that, and Tommy Tuberville. So, had never beaten Auburn in Tuscaloosa at that point as well. And I was a sophomore at Alabama in 2008. Typical Alabama Auburn game in Tuscaloosa. It's raining, it's cold, but Auburn was kind of falling apart. They hadn't fired Tuberville yet, but Cody Burns was their quarterback. I think he was their second or third string quarterback at the time, or at least their second or third quarterback that they had used that year. And you kind of just knew like if we get an opportunity to put it on them, we're going to put it on them. And started out kind of slow in the game. Took us a little while to get our first points on the board, which was a field goal. Early in the second quarter, Glenn Coffey would break a long touchdown run to make it 10-0. And then Auburn got the ball back. It was about 9:37 left to go in the second quarter, 3rd and 7. We've got our Rolando McClain and Terrence Cody and Bobby Greenwood and all those guys. And we also got this guy named Eric Anders, who had his hand in the ground but was lined up at left defensive end. So on the snap, Rolando McClain, blitzes up the middle. Eric Anders loops around, comes right up the middle, unblocked, hits Cody Burns, and kind of loses his footing, and then regains his footing and just carries him back another 5 yards and just body slams him. I liked the play so much that I got a picture of it. I got Eric Anders to sign it for me. And it was kind of like at that moment, we're up 10 to nothing. Auburn's really struggling. And to me, that hit was always just like letting out 5 years of just frustration, losing to Auburn out all in one play. And I think it's funny now that Eric Anders is an MMA fighter. So, maybe his first body slam ever before his professional career started. But I've always loved that play. As I showed, I've got an autographed picture from Eric Anders of it. And yeah, you can never go wrong body slamming an Auburn quarterback.
I'm trying to remember that year because did Saban call Eric Anders one of his rabbit rushers? I think that was the term
Yeah.
he described. Because Eric's not like a huge defensive player, but he was quick and he's got athleticism and he was tough. Which obviously he's an MMA fighter, so you know how tough he is. But I remember that season he always called Eric one of the rabbit rushers. But I remember that play where he lifted Cody Burns up off the ground and then drove him backwards. But that 2008 Iron Bowl, that you said it correctly. That was 5 years of frustration. Alabama fans lived through the misery of all those losses to all people, Tommy Tuberville. So you lost to him 5 straight times. For me, as we go or transition into the last one, this really isn't a play per se, but same situation. I was there covering the game in 2008. Rainy conditions, overcast, cold, but and Alabama already had secured its place in the SEC championship game, but you knew the Alabama fans wanted this game. They were waiting. They had 5 years of frustration pent up. But to me, the biggest emotions happened before the game. It was all the pregame festivities. And I remember Sarah Evans came out, did one of the greatest renditions of the national anthem at an Alabama game or any Alabama event I've ever been to. I remember I was in the press box. I looked to my left and right. I saw some of the other sports writers. They were all getting kind of misty-eyed and teary-eyed. Maybe I was too. I'm not going to lie. But she did such a wonderful rendition of that. And then the delivery of the game ball. So Saran Stacy comes out with his daughter. Remember a year earlier, he was in that tragic car accident where I think his wife and four of his children were killed by a drunk driver at a four-way stop, 2 miles from his home. And then to see him come actually be able to walk out there. And then I remember he brings the game ball out. He comes over and shakes Coach Saban's hand. And then he turns around and he just runs over to one of the student sections or one of the crowd sections. And he just starts jumping up and down, waving his arms in the air, trying to get the crowd fired up. And that was a moment that you knew something special had happened. And that game was going to mean a lot to a lot of people after those two moments before the game even kicked off.
So I got a story about Saran Stacy that I'm gonna share in just a little bit, and I've shared it on our old golf podcast, but it bears worth repeating. But just to finish off that 2008 Iron Bowl game, you talking about the emotions. I think we started Rammer Jammer before the game ended, and we got through the second time around with it, and then the band started playing it for a third time, and even me, I was like, I didn't know you could do this. I didn't know you could play Rammer Jammer a third time and a fourth time and a fifth time. So, and we all loved it. It was great. And I also remember like after the game, you know, 2:30 CBS game, so it probably ended about 6:30, and just going home and going to bed because it was like everything was right with the world again. Alabama had beaten Auburn. The state of Alabama was crimson again, and you just didn't have to worry about anything anymore. But I want to tell this Saran Stacy story real quick. Robbie Shelton, former Alabama golfer, currently on the Korn Ferry Tour. He's been back and forth between the PGA Tour and the Korn Ferry Tour. He was playing on the Korn Ferry Tour. This probably 6, 7 years ago. He is leading his Korn Ferry Tour tournament. It's on a Sunday, and he comes and he's got like a couple of stroke lead. Well, he comes out and his front nine has not been very good. But there's this guy that's on, following him the entire time that just keeps cheering him on, cheering him on. Robbie's girlfriend at the time, now his wife Kelsey, and I think his in-laws were there too. So they eventually go up and introduce themselves. Well, it's Saran Stacy, and being an Alabama golfer, Saran just felt like he had to be there to go cheer him on because as Robbie would make the turn again, he's kind of struggling. He lost the lead. It was either the ninth or the 10th hole. He's off the green, and Saran's just telling everybody he's going to chip in. He's going to chip in. He's going to chip in. Well, what does Robbie do? He goes and chips in, makes birdie, eventually goes on and wins the tournament. But Saran had to leave around the ninth or 10th hole right after Robbie chipped in. And I think the reason he gave was, I got to go, but I felt like I had to be here to support an
Hmm.
Alabama guy for as long as I could. So, you're not surprised the emotion that Saran Stacey showed in that 2008 game, and then hearing a story like that. And I'm sure there's other Saran Stacey stories like that as well out there of just how he would support other Alabama guys as well.
I mean, he was a special player, and remember, he backed up Murray Hill before he got the chance to actually start for Bill Curry. So that '89 season was a special season. He had a great year, and then even when Gene Stallings came in 1990, he relied because he totally revamped that offense. It went from a passing attack to the typical Gene Stallings offense, and there he is sitting there running Saran Stacy behind it. So Saran Stacy meant a lot to the program, still means a lot to the program, and the fans have a special place in their heart for Saran Stacy, not for just what he did on the field, but everything off the field too.
Last game that I'm going to go to that I was there for one of my favorite Alabama plays, 2012 SEC championship game against Georgia. Um, a game that I don't really know how we pulled out. It had been back and forth throughout the first half, not a huge amount of scoring, but Georgia comes out in the second half, gets a touchdown. Again, talking about bad Alabama field goal moments. We drive down, kick, settle for a field goal, kick gets blocked, and it bounces perfectly for Georgia to pick it up around the 50-yard line, run it all the way back for a touchdown. So I think we're down 21-10 at that point in that game. And from then on out, basically, ran the football right at Georgia. TJ Yeldon scored a touchdown. I think Eddie Lacy would score a touchdown. I know we went for two after the TJ Yeldon touchdown. We're up 25-21. Georgia gets a touchdown in the fourth quarter, and then it kind of goes back and forth a little bit. And with all that running, we got a 3rd and 5 play at the 50-yard line, about 3:55 left. Got freshman TJ Yeldon in the backfield, and we hand it off to him, and he gets hit at the 50-yard line, but fights his way to the 45 and gets a first down. And then the very next play was a play action to Yeldon, hitting Amari Cooper down the Georgia sidelines for a touchdown for us to go up 32-28. And we had some obnoxious Georgia fans in front of us. And I'm telling you, that play, we were on the Alabama sidelines, a little bit in the corner of the end zone, and you could tell first step off the line of scrimmage that Amari Cooper had the cornerback beat, and AJ just needed to set his feet and get it out there. And you just knew we had him. And so we're all celebrating as typical, Georgia fans. They left early. They shouldn't have left early. They obviously made a little bit of a run. But that was a special play. And of course, that's the play that then we eventually go in, beat Notre Dame, back-to-back national championships. That's definitely one of my favorite plays from Alabama history that I was actually a part, or at least at the game and able to see in person.
So we talked about this before off the air, but I was covering the game, and in the last 5 minutes, media always goes down on the field. So we're trying to get down to the Georgia Dome field, and as we're coming through, we're literally coming through the tunnel, walking onto the field, and that's when the play happened. And all I saw at the moment, I saw the ball come up. You could see it over everyone's head. I saw the arch, and then I saw it come down, and then I barely managed to see Amari catch it and score. So at least we had the timing that we saw that. We missed the first down run by TJ Yeldon because we were in the elevator trying to get down. But I saw the ball go up, and then I saw the ball come down, and that was an amazing play. Like anything else, I had recorded it. So when we got home late that night, I went back and watched the replay over and over again.
And Amari Cooper is a freshman for that season, and just a perfect release on the outside. I mean, I think Amari was our leading receiver that year as well, being AJ's number one option. But, a great game. You look back at it now, that was basically the national championship game because Notre Dame just didn't have the players. Um, they didn't have they didn't play the schedule. They didn't go through the gauntlet that we had to. I think it's fine to say this now and have a really good coach in Brian Kelly. He's now been exposed. As we know, he's supposed to be on the sidelines next week when we talk about the LSU game, but he won't be there anymore. So
Nope.
just that basically became the national championship game right then and there, and it did come down to the wire. But that was an awesome, awesome play, and again, just the Georgia Dome just popped right on the Alabama side once he caught it and scored the touchdown.
A lot of good memories in the Georgia Dome. There were a lot of good SEC championship memories there for Alabama playing in that Georgia Dome.
Yeah, and I told you I was going to try to do this, so I am going to sneak it in. I've got one more prop. This did not initially qualify, and it still, I guess, won't initially qualify because I was not in the Georgia Dome. I watched this one in Tuscaloosa, the 2009 Alabama Florida SEC championship game. But this is also one of my favorite plays. Let's see if I can straighten this out a little bit. There we go. This is William Vlahos blocking Brandon Spikes and Mark Ingram running behind him. And so I'll set the stage a little bit. It's the first quarter. We got the ball to start the game. We would go down, kick a field goal, stop Florida, get the ball back. And if you remember Brandon Spikes, he was Florida's middle linebacker. Earlier in the year when Florida played Georgia, Brandon Spikes was the linebacker that got caught on camera, putting his fingers through Noshawn Marino's helmet and trying to, gouge his eyes out and stuff like that. Well, in talking to William after the game, there had been a play or something like that where Brandon had thrown him down late or, had done something that was against the rules, but referees didn't catch it or anything like that. And what William told me was he told Brandon Spikes that you're gonna have to do more than gouge my eyes out to get me out of this game. So then we get the ball back, which would have been the next series. We've got the ball 2nd and 3 at the 50-yard line, and just run a simple handoff sweep to Mark Ingram. Well, Williams snaps the ball and he's pulling on the play, and I mean perfectly times it up as you see to hit Brandon Spikes, move him out of the hole. Mark Ingram goes for about a 20-yard run, and so that was always knowing the story behind it that there had already been some back and forth going on, and then watching William clear him out in that particular play and also was watching it with a bunch of people that knew William, went to school with him at Mountain Brook. When they ran the replay of that play, CBS did, and we're watching on the big screen. You know how everybody does the boom for the tradition video when it's Castile,
Jeremiah Castile. Yeah,
yeah,
Jeremiah Castile.
hits the Illinois offensive player. That was basically the same thing that happened in the room we were watching as William comes around and hits Brandon Spikes. And he had another great block on the screen pass to Mark Ingram that set up another touchdown. But so that is definitely one of my favorite plays because it's from a guy that I've grown up with, know a lot about, and then to have it with him autographing it, Mark Ingram autographing it. It doesn't technically make our countdown since I wasn't in the Georgia Dome, but I had to find a way to sneak it in there.
Well, we can count it. I was there for you, so I was covering
There
that
you go.
too. So
There you go.
it counts. We can make it count. How about that?
Yes, perfect, perfect. Well, that was a lot of fun. I mean, not surprising. There's so many plays that we've probably missed. And that's where we'd love to hear from you, our listeners, or people that are following the Time Machine on Twitter. Send us your comments. Send us your thoughts. We've obviously got time to talk about it in future episodes, and especially as we get ready for Alabama LSU next week. There's a lot of plays I imagine we can talk about from that Alabama LSU series as far as favorite plays in Alabama football history. But Michael, it's been a lot of fun. Any closing thoughts before we shut down the Time Machine for this week?
No, just hope the players are enjoying the time off and come back ready to go next week against LSU because there is a little bit of a tradition of LSU having success in Tuscaloosa, unfortunately.
There is a little bit, and I guess if they hadn't had some success in Tuscaloosa, then this wouldn't be a rivalry
No.
at all. It'd be like the Vanderbilt Alabama rivalry. So
Yep.
we'll look forward to diving into that next week. We appreciate everybody listening to the Tide Machine. Everybody be safe, have a great weekend, and roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
The Paul W. Bryant Museum is a captivating destination for sports enthusiasts and fans of the University of Alabama football program. Located in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, the museum is dedicated to preserving the legacy of the legendary coach Paul Bear Bryant. The Paul W. Bryant Museum showcases a remarkable collection of memorabilia, including trophies, photographs, and artifacts that span Bryant's career and the rich history of Alabama football. Visitors can explore interactive exhibits and learn about the team's storied past, making the Paul W. Bryant Museum a must-visit for any football aficionado. Fans can also experience exhibits highlighting success of both the Alabama men's basketball and women's softball programs. Open Tuesday through Sunday. Plan your visit today and experience the rich tradition of Alabama athletics. Roll Tide.